So, a very good morning to everybody and welcome to our IITPSA webinar with the Special Interest Group in Artificial Intelligence and Robotics. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all this morning. I see a number of people have joined already and are in the process of joining us. It's also my great honor to welcome Professor Tshilidzi Marwala from the University of Johannesburg and Johan Steyn, our chair of the Special Interest Group on Artificial Intelligence and Robotics of the Institute. Professor Marwala, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Tony, and good morning, Johan, and I'm looking forward to engaging both of you and your spectators.
Thank you so much, Professor. Johan, good morning to you as well and welcome.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for the IITPSA for hosting this session. Very excited about it.
As we are indeed, thank you. So I'm just going to, well, the people are joining rapidly, which is awesome. I'm just going to give us a few seconds whilst people join in, excuse me, and remind everybody that this is a 1-hour webinar and we will be respectful of time, especially as we have a very busy man in the Vice-Chancellor and Principal of University of Johannesburg with us. So thank you very much again, Professor and Johan. We all have busy days. I think at this stage I'm going to gracefully or ungracefully hand over to Johan to take over the session, and I'll touch base as we go along. Johan, I'll be monitoring the chat group if there are any questions, and leave you and the Professor to have an awesome chat about his book. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Tony. Professor, it's such an honor to have you with the IITPSA this morning. I prepared last night and this morning to do an intro on you, and then I realized I'm going to spend the whole session just going through your various accolades and publications. So I'm going to keep the intro fairly small. As I said earlier, Tony, thank you to you and the IITPSA, and to, as Tony also said, you guys are welcome to add questions in the chat box, and we'll try and get to them toward the end and ask the Prof all the questions that we're posing. So just a little bit on Prof Marwala. He was at the University of Cambridge where he did his PhD in artificial intelligence. He served as a trustee with the Nelson Mandela Foundation. He was a visiting fellow at Harvard University. He's the deputy chair of the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. He is the vice-chancellor and principal of the University of Johannesburg. And amongst the many, many books he wrote, the book we really want to talk about today is Closing the Gap, the Fourth Industrial Revolution in Africa. I hope that served you well, Prof. As I said, I could go on for another 40 minutes, but it's such an honor to have you. Are you well?
No, I'm absolutely well. Obviously, these are difficult times, Johan. We are learning online, so digitization is no longer just something that we do. It is the way of life. All our classes are online, and the registration went very, very well. So we are blessed in the sense that we are a university with huge capacity to do many, many things. But we do worry about the pace at which vaccines are being rolled out. I think we should accelerate that so that we can restart our economy on a much fuller gear.
That's so true, Prof. I've got so many questions I want to ask you. And as I said, I want to focus on the book amongst other things, but you've written some other academic pieces and also more kind of popular books that people like me will understand. I don't know if I'll understand academic stuff always, but look, I think it's such a relevant topic. So I've got a 7-year-old son, and I often think about his future in our country, or in the world for that matter. And what I like about your book, Prof, it's really written for the kind of the man on the street like me and others. You explain what AI is, because I think there's still a lot of confusion around what the technology is. And I think you make it very practical, explaining how AI is used in different industries. But what I also appreciate is that you're talking about the great potential for Africa and South Africa, but also the potential problems. So I think from a socio-economic point of view, there's so much we need to do, and I think that's what you're doing with the president and the presidential commission. So let's maybe start with the good stuff. So what can we in South Africa and in Africa do? What could we be doing as people on the street, if you would, and then people in power when it comes to this kind of technology and where it's going? What's the good part of the picture, if you would?
Yeah, I think what we ought to be doing is to understand this technology. It's very important that we understand a technology that is so transformative for us to be able to use it in our economy, in our society, and all various aspects of our lives. We have to understand it, you know. And there's this perception that in order to understand artificial intelligence, you actually have to be an engineer or a computer scientist or a mathematician. Far from the truth. You know, there are many aspects of artificial intelligence. For example, the philosophers are making sense of artificial intelligence. The politicians are making sense of artificial intelligence. Of course, they have to, given what we went through with Cambridge Analytica and its use of Facebook data to allegedly to influence the US election. And what we have been doing here at the University of Johannesburg, for example, we have a course called Introduction to Artificial Intelligence. Every student who comes to the University of Johannesburg actually studies this subject. It does not teach you how to program. You're not going to know how to program in Python. For you to be able to do that, you have to go to the Department of Computer Science or Department of Engineering to learn about that. But it will tell you about what does artificial intelligence mean? Where has it been applied? Which industries are being transformed by this technology? And you as a person, what do you do so that you can be able to make use of this technology in your life?
I think that's so key, Prof, that people that we are training in secondary and tertiary education is familiar with what this technology is. About a year ago, I did some work where we were mentoring young people from rural areas. And I was surprised that these youngsters knew so much about this technology, obviously through reading and Googling. But I think, and you make a very important point, it's not the exclusive domain of computer people. I think if you want to become a lawyer or an accountant or a teacher or any career you go in, you have to have some sort of knowledge of this. Yeah. And then and there's so much we can unpack, but if we in South Africa, government and business and we individuals don't, if you would wake up to where the world is going with this technology, what will our future look like? So from a negative point of view.
Well, the future is going to be bleak indeed. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, was quoted saying that nations that are going to conquer that are going to master artificial intelligence are going to conquer the world. And it goes without saying that nations that do not master artificial intelligence, they are going to be conquered. Conquered does not necessarily mean that you have foreign armies marching into your country. It just means that you have no stake in the economic the economic activities of the time. So, such nations are going to be poorer. And what has emerged now, and this is what many writers have actually observed, is that there has emerged two AI superpowers, and that is United States and China. We know the AI strategy of China that was adopted by government, where they are implementing AI in every aspect that they are manufacturing, whether it is their phones, whether it is their version of Uber called Didi, where you can type in English and the person on the other side reads it in Chinese, and he types in Chinese and so on and so forth. And I'm sure sooner rather than later, you will speak, on the phone on this side in English, and the person will hear in Chinese, and you will reply in Chinese. And when it comes to you, it will be in English. So you have these two superpowers, and of course they have scale. And because one of the engines of artificial intelligence is data. If you have huge amount of data, you can actually be able to train these models to do all sorts of activities. Many people tend to think that the competitive advantage is on the development of algorithm. No, that is not the case. If that is the case, most of the algorithms, almost all of them, were developed in the West. Even in countries that are not, that when you think about are not big AI countries. I mean, I'll give you an example. Self-organizing maps were developed in Finland. But when you talk about artificial intelligence, you don't think of Finland. And I have no doubt that the Chinese and the Americans are using self-organizing maps much more than the Finnish people are actually doing this. So the advantage is not on the algorithm. The advantage is on the data. Once you have this data, then you can be able to take whichever algorithms, and many of these algorithms are actually available for free. TensorFlow is a free AI software that is offered by Google, and Microsoft also does that. Apple also has its own version of TensorFlow. So all we need to do is to learn how these algorithms work and to collect data, to avail and secure data, so that our businesses can be able to use this data to train systems. I mean, just to give you an example. In our hospitals, just to give you one example, in our hospitals, we collect a lot of data on X-ray images, but our businesses do not have access to that database. Of course, if we open it up for businesses to create automated decision makers based on AI, then you have to secure it, which basically means we shouldn't know the individuals who contributed to the data. We should just have anonymized database. And can you imagine what it will do to the field of medicine? It will actually start the whole industry altogether.
You refer to that in your book, where you say if you go to one hospital in a specific area and they do tests and scans on you, and then a few weeks or months later you go to another hospital, the second hospital can't access the data from your first visit, so they almost have to do those tests again. And you touch on some important things, because, I mean, it would be amazing if our medical data is available, especially in an emergency, but it opens up that can of worms of privacy that you've alluded to.
Well, I mean, you just touched a point that is, we have been talking about a unified medical database for a long time. The first time I heard about it was actually in 2006 at SITA, State Information Technology Agency. And at that point, there was even a company, Oregon, that was being engaged to be able to make that happen. But that has never been implemented. Why has it not been implemented? The answer is very, very simple. The capacity, the technological capacity, lies in private hands rather than in public hands. If we are going to look at government to lead us into the artificial intelligence age, then we will never get there, because if you go to many of our companies, whether it is in our banks, you have AI capabilities in abundance, but if you go to our government departments, they don't have such capacity. So it basically means, and this is one of the recommendations of the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission, that on entering the fourth industrial age, the role of private players cannot be emphasized enough. If that role is not there, we are never even going to start. So it is very important, public-private partnerships. So that's probably one of the reasons why we don't have a universal medical record, because it requires standardization, which means that every hospital must be able to collect data in a similar manner. It requires, the data centers, storage of data. That data has to be stored somewhere. And there are two options there. We either build our own data center, which would not, I wouldn't advise for that, given the fact that these data centers, they consume a lot of energy, and energy security is a big problem in South Africa. Even in California, where you would think that they have abundance of energy, they are playing around with ideas of putting these data centers in the ocean so that the cooling process can be aided by the ocean rather than by the refrigeration. So the other alternative is actually to buy what is called a cloud. You buy a cloud. People will talk about security. You can deal with issues of security, the ability to compute. For example, now our students, we don't have to build big supercomputers to be able to do sophisticated calculation. We just published a book on hybrid Monte Carlo to train machine learning models. And Wilson and Rendani, the students were working on that, used to just go to Amazon and hire computing facilities for a few hours, and they do the computing, and that's it. And that is great, because if it was in the past, we wouldn't be able to do that without some computer cluster or high performance computing cluster. So very important issues that require the technical wisdom that is not necessarily present in the public spaces.
You touch on the Presidential Commission where you are involved, and I'm going to tell you what my perception is, because there was quite a bit of press around the Commission and the findings and the recommendations. I think there were 7, and you've already referenced 1. And then it seems that things went quiet. So as a layperson, if you would, I'm wondering, what are these guys doing? But then you also touched on, are we all looking at the Commission and the government, for that matter, to get things going? Or the power is in our hands as civil society and as business and industry? So if we can just touch on what the Commission's recommended, and also what is happening there. Is it really quiet? I think you're meeting twice a year. What's the actions that's happening?
Well, obviously the Commission's work is now completed, because our work was basically to come up with a blueprint on what South Africa must do. And we have come up with those 8 recommendations. We even went a little bit step further to say that this is how we were supposed to implement this. One of the things that we did was to have the South African AI Dialogue Conference. I don't know whether you remember that. It happened last year.
Okay.
Yeah, and it was being driven by Andy Lenqaba. And there we had many people from companies such as Google were there. It was attended by over 1,000 people, and there was even a process in which people can participate. I'm sure you can go to this website, the AI Dialogue, and basically what we were saying was that this whole recommendation of developing the National AI Institute has to be led by South Africa at large, not by government, by the experts, by the practitioners, by the special interest groups that really are passionate about this technology. It gives us a competitive edge if we do it like that. If you give it to somebody who is not passionate about this recommendation, it will actually not go anywhere. So what were these recommendations? The first recommendation was invest in human capacity development in the areas associated with the fourth industrial revolution. Ability to understand blockchain, Internet of Things, all this rich technology. It has to be embedded in our schooling system, whether it is primary, whether it is secondary, whether it is tertiary, but most importantly, adult-based education. Traditionally, we think about adult-based education is that educational system that teaches people how to read and write. But illiteracy of the fourth industrial age is no longer the inability to read or write. It is the inability to understand what AI is, to understand what Internet of Things is, and so on and so forth. And we flesh out exactly what needs to be done. Universities, we must make these courses accessible to all, and as I suppose the UJ's introductory course on AI is a case in point. Then the second one is the establishment of the National AI Institute. Then the third one is on industrialization. Because we hear a lot of people complaining about that South Africa has deindustrialized, we have become a consumer economy. We no longer produce things that we used to produce, like shoes that I wore in the 80s were actually produced in South Africa, but today they are not. They are produced in Asia, and many people have come up with weird recommendation. One of the things that I used to hear, they used to say beneficiation is the only way we are going to reindustrialize. The truth of the matter is we have deindustrialized because we have failed to invest in new technologies of production. The new technologies of production are based on automation. Of course, when you see some companies that are like, if you go to BMW plant in South Africa, you will realize that it is highly automated, because it is part of the global ecosystem, But our own companies in South Africa are not automated. So the recommendation basically says, develop a strategy where we can use these technologies in order to increase our competitiveness and reindustrialize. And then we have another recommendation on data availing and securing data that I've already talked about. Then we have another recommendation is about incentives. One economist was asked a question, summarize the whole of economics in one word. And his answer was incentives. Because if you have incentives, you have production, you have supply chains to take those products to the markets, and so on and so forth. And what are those incentives? It can be tax breaks. I mean, that is the obvious one. That if you are investing in something that is classified as production, increasing the productive forces, you are going to buy a new set of equipment. It goes without saying that you should be incentivized over somebody who is buying, a top of the range, importing a top of the range Italian car, because it's not for production, it's for consumption. Tax breaks, access to research and development, grants, and also knowledge. What is happening at the CSIR? Is it valuable enough to be given to people? The Chinese have something called special economic zones. What people do not understand is that the special economic zones are actually an incentive scheme. When they introduced it, when Deng Xiaoping introduced it, he said, we are going to, China is not a familiar place to produce. the political system is not a political system that people in the West will be dying to go and invest, because, as you know, it is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party. So we're going to put places called special economic zones, where the rules that are going to apply are not going to be the same rules that apply in the rest of China. As they say, the rest is history. If you go to Shenzhen, which was the first special economic zone, it is one of the biggest and wealthiest cities in the world, with a total GDP which is higher than the total GDP of South Africa. Just a city. So and then we go to to another recommendation, which is really on investing into infrastructure. The infrastructure of connectivity. Why have we not awarded spectrum in the last 15 years? And what is the implication of that on South Africa's competitiveness? Because there is a cost. We just don't even quantify it, and the fact that we don't even quantify that cost is concerning enough. Our economists are supposed to say this is an important initiative because we have not done anything about it in the last 15 years. This is how much it has shaven from our total GDP. Very, very important. I know that IITPSA has issued guidelines already. There is a court case that is stalling the process, but the sooner we move into that. And when we were consulting companies, we consulted the European Chamber of Commerce in South Africa. And they told us something. They said, no, in South Africa, people think only MTN or Vodacom or Cell C or Telkom are interested in the spectrum. Our companies are interested in the spectrum. If you are running a production line and you have all these robots, you need a spectrum. You need to be awarded a spectrum so that your robots can be able to communicate with one another. The same with hospitals. I even think universities must have their own spectrum. And obviously that is a model that we never really understood. And now when you go to the auctioning of spectrum, how do you do it in a situation whereby the demand for spectrum should not necessarily just go to telecommunication companies? Then we have a recommendation on rules and regulations. That if you look at our rules and regulations, are they in line with the fourth industrial revolution? Issues of security, issues of companies that are cloud-based companies that are operating from the cloud, like Airbnb, but they are not domiciled in South Africa. Issues such as data collection by Twitter and so on and so forth, which is not regulated. So let's do it. Then we added the last recommendation, because we realized that in South Africa we talk too much. We talk too much, and I think it is time to start doing. So we propose an implementation council, and the implementation council is not the Fourth Industrial Revolution Commission, and we specifically say that it has to be drawn primarily from experts that are largely in the private sector. Very, very important. Fortunately, our report has actually been adopted. It has been gazetted, and now is really the time for implementation.
That is exciting, Prof. So a lot of the people on this webinar, or people who might look at this or watch the video in the next few weeks, are people working in the field, in smaller and in bigger companies. What are the practical things people like us can do to work with government and to work with one another to work around these recommendations that you've just mentioned?
No, I think I think we need to form special groups, interest groups, on all these recommendations. Already we have formed the AI dialogue. It's a special group on AI. It just needs to consolidate it, because what we found was that AI, whether it is AI research, we do fantastic work in AI. South Africa is not necessarily it's not necessarily foreign to some of the big AI algorithms. For example, there's an AI algorithm called the Gaussian mixture models. It was done by Mr. Krichler from Johannesburg. Of course, now now when you hear about Gaussian mixture models, if you just go to the internet, I'm sure you're going to get millions and millions and millions of hits. But it was started here in South Africa. So what we have found is that the AI community is very fragmented. And because it is fragmented, we are failing to build economies of scale. Even something as simple as research. You go to the SKA, they are doing AI. If you go to the CSIR, they're doing AI. You go to University of Pretoria, you have the IITPSA Chair in data science by Dr. Marwala. You go to University of Cape Town, but we don't have a forum, not even a conference, an AI conference. I know we used to have a conference called PRASA in the 90s and the 2000s, which used to get all AI experts. Now those conferences have become smaller because South Africans are now going global. But when they go global, going global is not the creation of economies of scale. It is good for one's career, but it is bad for creating economies of scale here in South Africa. The same with manufacturing. Let us have a special interest group on that. All these recommendations require special interest groups, and I would say that we don't even have to wait for government, because we know what these recommendations are all about. We can form these special interest groups and invite government and say, this is who we are, this is what we are advancing, what are you bringing to the table? Whether it is a minister, whether it is the president, and so on and so forth. And I think if we have that mindset, I think things are going to move much, much faster than we think.
That really, I think, is a clarion call to us who work in the field and people who are on the webinar, Prof, to not, like I said earlier, and like you've alluded, to not sit back and wait for things to happen and then we jump in. We have to make it happen. I think and you mentioned something that I absolutely agree with, that the community is very fragmented. There's a lot of people doing amazing things, and you alluded to the universities in particular. I mean, in Cape Town, I know of a number of very exciting world-class AI kind of startup companies, but it doesn't feel like we are being pulled together to work together and do good for the country. So I think that's a very important point that you've mentioned.
No, absolutely.
I want to ask you, you've alluded to automation, and you speak about it at length in your book as well. And I want to ask you this, because I think for us to become more competitive, we have to smartly automate. And we hear things like robotic process automation, intelligent automation, and smart automation and the like. But then we also have a very high unemployment rate. And I mean, the coronavirus pandemic didn't do us very well. So how do we do that balancing act between becoming more competitive and automating and not getting rid of people but upskilling them? And I think theoretically it sounds so nice, but if I was the head of a big bank, for instance, I wouldn't know how to do that without losing people. How do we do that balancing act, in your opinion?
No, I actually think the balancing act is not really a balancing act, because we need to have a mindset of capital formation and competitiveness, and I have emphasized this, that South Africa does not talk enough about competitiveness, but we know that is what we need in order to grow our economy. And without a large economy, we are not going to be able to tackle the problems of underinvestments into human capacity development, the so-called HDI index that we're certainly we are on the bottom side. So we need a larger economy. And for us to have a larger economy, we must have a competitive economy. And for us to have a competitive economy, we have to deploy all means of production, including automation, that will make us competitive. Now the question is, what happens to the people? What happens to the people? We have to educate them. We have to create a safety net. We have to reskill them. But most importantly, we need to expand our economies. There are lots of economic activities that we are not even participating in. I mean, I'll give you an example. South Africa is not really a big, but it's not even a significant participant in the electronic industry. The electronic industry simply does not exist in South Africa. I mean, you used to have companies such as Cantron, state-owned companies that were doing a little bit of that. But today, when I go and talk to people, they say, no, with China, we are not going to do this thing. At the University of Johannesburg, we used to make drones. All sorts of drones. We used to manufacture them just 10 years ago. I went to the engineering department and said, why don't you do it anymore? He says, no. How can I do it? I can be able to get this drone for a fraction of the price from China, and so on and so forth. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have to be much more preoccupied about competitiveness, because that is the only way in which we are going to be wealthier, and that is the only way that we are going to raise enough capital to deal with problems of certainly poverty and inequality, and to be able to reskill the people and so on and so forth. So for me, I say automating is not an option. It's not one of the options. It is the only option that is available for any serious economy that wants to compete globally.
Absolutely. Prof, I've got one more question, and then I'm going to look at the questions. I've just seen here on the side that there's a lot of comments and questions flowing, so we'll get to that. And then also towards the end, Tony, I think it'll be interesting to hear from an IITPSA point of view, because Prof spoke about interest groups and things like that. So, and we've got people of the PESA on here and others. So what can we do from our platform point of view, given what Prof has said? So I'm just warning you, I'm going to get to you in a little bit before we end. Prof, what I want to ask you before we get to all the questions, if everything that we've spoken about, if we think of the future of our country, of our children, and if we think of embracing this technology, are you more positive than negative when you think about our future, or are you more negative than positive, and why?
You see, there is a cover article on Brainstorm. You can go and get. I don't know whether you saw the cover article.
A new one.
Did you see it? And,
I did, yes.
And then they say capitalism. They have my picture, and they say capitalism, socialism, and pessimism. Of course, they are talking about these issues. I think obviously there are all sorts of feelings when in an era where we are living. We are optimistic that for the first time globally, we can actually be able to increase production with using less resources, because globally we are just much more efficient. That is optimistic. Then the pessimistic part is that this beast that we are tackling, we don't know where it is taking us. We don't know what is the implication of all these developments on the aggregate demand. Because if people are taken out of the world of work, ultimately the aggregate demand of goods and services is going to fall. What is the implication of that? On the economic model that is based on work and trading, what will be the future of that? What will be the future of the displacement of people from the workforce on issues such as tax revenue collection? And some people have been thinking about this. Bill Gates says, no, we have to start taxing the robots. You know, what is a robot? You know, I mean, what is a robot? I mean, you know, it's not, certainly it's not some humanoid Terminator type of a humanoid. That is it, but it is just one aspect of a robot. Many of the robots we don't even see. You know, they are softwares. They are not physical. You know, universal basic income. Elon Musk, our own Elon Musk, talks about universal basic income. How do you even start engaging universal basic income if your economy is not growing? You know, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are at an exciting time, but there are so many questions that nobody knows the answers to. So the future is uncertain. So we are nervous about what the world of work is going to mean into the future, and what is the role of humans in that world of work, and what is going to happen to our children in that world. You know, so I'm both optimistic, but also pessimistic at the same time. And it will depend on what we do,
Yes.
which side of the pendulum we are going to end up. Will depend on what we do, the choices that we will make, or that we are already making, in fact.
And I think, and just before I get to the questions, Prof, it's such an important point. It's not out of our control yet. We have time, maybe not a lot, and I think we need to move quickly. We still have time to shape the future of our children and our societies, given where this technology is going.
Absolutely. And maybe just to add, because the whole concept of automation is really misunderstood. You know, when I was working long time ago, more than almost 20 years ago at South African breweries, you had automation already. I'm sure there was automation in the 90s, there was automation in the 80s. So automation is not new. What is new is that automation that we saw in that era was physical automation. You know, we were basically automating physical tasks. You know, they were being automated. Now, the automation of today, of the fourth industrial age, of course, physical automation is still part of the deal. But now you have cognitive automation, where you are automating thinking. You know, you are making machines think. You are making machines do things that are just completely human. We expected, you know, just think of the bots, you know, the chatbots. I mean, you know, you know that now you're automating cognitive capabilities.
And hence the challenge, because I mean, I might be a factory worker losing my job through a robot, but now I'm a knowledge worker whose job is in jeopardy because the knowledge worker is now the smart machine. Prof, I want to get to the first question I see, and that's from Kudzai. He says, could Prof comment on the recently proposed draft national data on cloud policy, particularly the State Digital Infrastructure Company? Is that clear, or shall I read it again?
No, it is quite clear. I must confess, I was engaged on the draft much earlier or on this. You know, For me, I mean, this is just my personal views, is that yes, we can form a data company and a state data company, but I don't think that is the solution to our problems. I think we should form a private public data company, and that company, its primary role would be to promote and to create the environment for the data economy to thrive, for example, by availing secure data that government collects, by suggesting data that ought to be collected, and how it can be monetized, and so on and so forth. So I am not a fan of government building more and more institutions, because I know many such institutions have not worked. I mean, let's just talk about infrastructure, for example. From a policy perspective, we knew that commercial companies are not going to invest in places where the demand and the revenues that are going to be generated in those demands are low. And we created a company called the Universal Services Agency. And that company collects 1% of the revenues from our top telecoms companies. Now, let's look at the results. Are we proud of what they have achieved? No. In fact, the more I read more about corruption at the Universal Services Agency than I read about an impressive infrastructure that they have actually laid down. The other company, SITA, State Information Technology Agency, it was formed in order to create economies of scale when it comes to government procurement. Has SITA been a success or a failure? I'm afraid it has not been a success. It has had more, I understand it has had, in the last 20 years, it has had more than 20 CEOs. So for me, going to form another state institution on a technology that requires cutting edge skills that you are not going to get as a state-owned enterprise, for me, I wouldn't go for that.
Okay. The next question from Adrian, I think you've already answered, because he also asks about the state-owned cloud computing facility. Andre is asking about the impact of robotic process automation on the admin workforce in Africa. And I think you have partially answered that already, but I think that's a good question. If you think of people who typically do back office work, who might not be able to be upskilled, because I think they are the ones who's most in danger of losing the jobs, the repetitive kind of work. And if you think from an Africa point of view. No,
absolutely. I mean, you just go to banks. I mean, you go to banks, usually you have these white-collar workers who would look at your application for credit, and they will, how much do you earn, and so on. They will have all sorts of charts, and then they will come up with a credit score. And then that credit score will determine whether you are given a loan or not, what is the interest rate of that contract that you are given. Now, AI can do that much better than those people. In fact, AI does even what those people were not doing. You have software agents that even go to the internet and look for information around you to see, whether you have been involved in controversies, and so on and so forth. Maybe you were found drinking and driving, and so on and so forth. Things that can have an impact in your ability to to have a stable income and so on and so forth. So those jobs are going to disappear in the long run, but in the short run, those decisions are just going to be human plus machine decisions. So, which basically means in the medium term, all those people must learn to work with these machines, And ultimately, when machines become much, much better at doing these things, I have no doubt that human beings are going to be retired from there. Now, the question is, what do we do with them, and that is this idea that we have to educate people for multiple careers becomes even more important in that era.
Absolutely. Maybe a last question before I bring in Tony, Prof. Cornet is asking whether UJ is partnering with the IT industry to stay abreast of the latest technology, and do you incorporate it into the degrees offered? So I think the question is about how UJ, or for that matter other universities, work with technology companies, collaborating, and to ensure that, I guess, maybe if I can ask it from my side, is how do you get it away from being purely academic to practical, so people are employable when they enter the workforce?
Well, absolutely. We run joint projects. For example, we have a short learning project on with Amazon Web Services, where you can come and study at the University of Johannesburg, get a certificate that makes you understand those technologies. We are doing similar things with Microsoft. I have a monthly meeting with the global CEO of MTN, and we have regular meetings. I have regular meetings with Google. We have people from industries that come and serve into our industrial advisory boards, so that our academics are augmented, our processes are augmented with what is happening in industry. So I would say that more than any other university in South Africa, the University of Johannesburg is probably much more embedded in what is happening in industry, and simply because of the nature of the leadership that we have. The leadership at the University of Johannesburg is more technical. The top leaders you have more engineers at the top layer of engineers and computer scientists and scientists at the top layer of our management than any other university in South Africa.
Well, that's fantastic to hear, Prof. Tony, can I ask you to join us, because what I'm keen to discuss, just as we've got about 7 minutes left, an organization like the IITPSA, and there are others represented on this webinar, and there are others obviously that's relevant. But from an IITPSA point of view, if you would, working on the ground and looking at what the organization's passion is, given what Prof has been speaking about, I think almost we should start taking control as the citizens and not wait for government. Any comments or questions on that?
Sure. Thanks, Johan. And Professor, excuse me, thank you so much for a really, really interesting conversation and very enlightening. And I think it resonates with many, many people on the call. I think from IITPSA's point of view, there are many things, starting with like this very webinar. So the ability to create awareness and introduce the thought leaders in the space, like Professor Marwala, who actually, informing us and giving us different aspects and different thoughts about the impact of artificial intelligence and its what's the word I'm looking for? Rollout, if you like, implementation in the country, and the fact that it is a real thing, not something we should, what did he say? Not an option. Okay, it's a reality. It has to be done. From the IITPSA's point of view, we are a professional body. We are passionate about skills, about ethics, about professionalism. And clearly there are skills issues rolled into this, which the professor has alluded to. Johan Steyn mentioned on the chat group, one of our social ethics committee members, the challenges faced with young people who qualify in IT and end up going to teach English as a second language in China. So we're not even using the skills that we have. Then we have the challenge of reskilling those who may be displaced, if we like, by AI and Internet of Things and so on and so forth. And I think we have a role to play in that as well, in terms of creating the awareness, getting the right parties together. The professor speaks eloquently about collaboration. And, I've always said that no organization and no man is an island unto itself or him or herself. And I think it's very important that we have the right people speaking together. We have the opportunity to expose that message, if you like, and to raise the awareness through our members. And each of our members who are practitioners in this space should also be keen to get involved and make themselves available to what's the word I'm looking for, perpetuate the process. So I think, the key things would be thought leadership, such as Professor Marwala is giving us, growing the awareness. Our special interest group, Johan, which you chair, has potentially a role to play, and we can think about what that is, not least of which is webinars like this. And professors speaking about a much bigger special interest group at national level. And the question is, how can we interact? How can we collaborate? And I think we need to explore that, we need to explore those. I'm aware I've got a number of board members on the chat group as well, and they may have their own ideas. Kutsai, whose question you raised, is one of them. Our president, Thabo Mashakwani, is on the group as well, Moyo de Roche and others. And the reskilling and the initiatives around skills, around professionalism, ethics. Ethics is a big thing. We haven't really touched on that today, about ethics and AI, and I know it can be quite an emotive subject as to the kind of culture that we inculcate in ethics and the kind of mindsets and the thoughts, and whether we discriminate and whether AI will discriminate in time to come because of how it's set up in the first place. And I must admit, Professor, I'm an absolute layman in this space. I'm actually in awe of all the things you've shared with us. But I think those are the things that we can start doing, potentially workshops, conferences, etc. Because what Professor said that the University of Joburg is doing, where it's introducing all students to the basic concepts of AI and the Internet of Things. And I think that is so important. We speak about digital literacy, and digital literacy is no longer just, can I use a computer? Can I navigate around a piece of hardware or use the internet? There's so much more to it because it touches every aspect of our lives. So I think for me, there's a lot that we can do, Johan. I mean, it's as someone said on the chat group, a hospital pass, I think. So thank you for that. But seriously, the Institute is well positioned, and we need to capitalize on that.
Thank you, Tony. Before we end off, and before I thank you formally, Prof, just a bit of marketing on our next event. I've just put it in the chat group. So the next AI and Robotics Special Interest Group event, the plan is for the 22nd of April, and we've got two very interesting people from Vodacom and Sanlam who heads up their smart automation and intelligent automation divisions. So it'll be interesting to talk with them about the practical applications of some of the things we've spoke about. So please keep an eye out for the newsletter for more information on that. Prof, it's an absolute singular pleasure to have had you. Thank you for the wisdom. Thank you for the way in which you share it. And we look forward to speak with you again and to work with you. And we wish you all the very best in this very important time, the very important work that you're doing. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. And I really enjoyed coming here, and I look forward to engaging you in the future.
Thank you,
Professor
Tony.
Johan from the Institute, thank you both so very much. Prof, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure. And we're really looking forward to engaging with you in the future. So thank you for that opportunity. Wishing all our delegates who've joined us today a very good day further. Thank you for being with us. Professor Marwala, we wish you an awesome day as well, and we really appreciate your insights. And we'll say goodbye for now. Thanks all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.